Several people have asked me to comment on the Dillian Whyte, Jermaine Franklin undercard. So we can have a look at it here. You've got Chevon Clark, who hasn't looked that impressive to me so far. He's the cruiserweight, I think Jamaican born. Hasn't looked that impressive. He's looked a bit vulnerable, actually, in terms of punch resistance. So he's on there. Craig Richards against Bolotniks is an interesting fight. Bolotniks, of course, fought Joshua Buatsi, and he doesn't have the greatest record on paper, 19-6-1, but he's a tough SOB, Richard Bolotniks. Definitely a tough guy, and that'll be an interesting one with Spider Richards. Fabio Wardley versus Nathan Gorman is another interesting fight. Wardley 14-0, Gorman 19-1, that one loss being against Daniel Dubois. Gorman has a deeper background in boxing. He had a lot more amateur fights. In fact, Fabio Wardley didn't have any amateur fights. I think he comes from a white-collar background, doesn't he? So Gorman, you would imagine the technically better of the two, more well-schooled, but Wardley has got good athleticism. He's shown good power. And so far, he's managed to get the job done and win. So there's something to be said for a guy who, even if he doesn't have the deepest boxing background, still manages to get it done. Maybe he's just that kind of born winner. Will that be enough, though, against Nathan Gorman, who, as I say, is the better schooled of the two? And then top of the bill, Dillian Whyte against Jermaine Franklin. It's an interesting fight because of the fact that Dillian Whyte's punch resistance these days seems less than stellar. He's been knocked out twice in, the past 3-4 fights. He's been knocked out twice badly. So you really have to question Dillian Whyte's ability to take a shot and whether he's actually recovered neurologically, never mind psychologically, because Dillian Whyte psychologically is one of the strongest fighters in the heavyweight division. Very tough mentally, but there's some stuff that the mind doesn't have a hold over when it comes to neurology. The stuff that happens in the brain to the central nervous system after somebody suffers these heavy knockouts. Sometimes fighters just can't take shots anymore when they go through these types of things. And that appears to be where Dillian Whyte's at right now, because the shot he got hit with off Tyson Fury did not look like the biggest punch Dillian Whyte has been hit with in his career at all. The Povetkin shot looked harder. Of course, that laid him out cold. He wasn't able to get up from that. He did get up from the Tyson Fury uppercut, but you go back to his fight against Anthony Joshua. He took loads of uppercuts in that fight, loads of shots, which looked from the outside just as hard, if not harder, than the uppercut that Fury finished him with. And he was able to stay on his feet up until the 7th round when he eventually got taken out with a series of punches. There was a big right hand, and then he finally got finished off with an uppercut. So, yeah, I don't think his punch resistance is anything like it was earlier on in his career. And that's down to the fact that he gets hit so much. And not just in his professional fights, but in sparring. You know, Dillian Whyte didn't have an extensive amateur background. He isn't the most athletic guy. So when he was in that Klitschko camp, well, several Klitschko camps, and obviously sparring Tyson Fury and David Price and Mark Potter and David Hay and Derek Chisora and all these guys when he's just a novice, taking loads of punches, it all adds up. You know, if you're dealing with a guy who's a lot more athletically gifted, he can stay away when he's in those sparring sessions with those much more experienced fighters and get hit less. So his punch resistance is not getting chipped away at to the same extent, but yet he's still picking up all the experience in sparring. You see what I'm saying? And Dillian Whyte is a guy who loves a tear up in the gym as much as he loves a tear up in his pro fights. And that just leads to him getting hit with loads of big shots. So this is why the Jermaine Franklin fight is intriguing to me. Franklin, even though he's unbeaten 21-0, you look at who he's beat and you look at the performances and it doesn't seem that impressive. If you've watched him fight, he's a big lump. He's got pretty fast hands for a guy of his size. He seems quite well schooled. The way he throws his punches is quite neat and tidy. He's not as sloppy looking as Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte can look sloppy and wild with the way he throws his shots. Franklin looks a lot more coordinated. But of course, Dillian Whyte has the experience. On paper, Dillian Whyte is the bigger puncher of the two. But again, that could be evened up by Dillian Whyte's lack of punch resistance. So if you've got one guy who's, I don't know what Franklin's chin is like, to be fair, but let's just say he's got an average chin. If you got one guy's got an average chin, but average power, the other guy's got a weak chin, but good power, it's even because both guys have got the ability to knock each other out. Do you know what I mean? Because of the weaker punch resistance of the bigger puncher. And by the way, I want to clarify something. So I'm sure there are going to be some Fury fanatics scrambling around, upset. Dillian Whyte, when he fought Tyson Fury, was a better fighter than when he fought Anthony Joshua in every way, as far as I'm concerned, apart from punch resistance. That's the only thing that the Dillian Whyte who fought AJ had over the Dillian Whyte who fought Tyson Fury. Just punch resistance in terms of power, conditioning, his boxing brain, etc., etc. The version that Fury beat was superior to the version that AJ beat. But the punch resistance, no. He just doesn't have what he used to have. So let me just clarify that. So this Franklin fight could be interesting. I watched Franklin fight a guy called Rydell Booker, and it was a pretty entertaining scrap. Booker repeatedly caught Franklin with left hooks. I think it was more so in the early going. He kept catching him with these left hooks. Franklin was coming in, throwing shots, and his chin was in the air. Now, if he does that against Dillian Whyte, one of them big left hooks from Whyte could take his head clean off. Unless Franklin has got some kind of iron jaw, then he's going to find himself in serious problems if he comes in throwing shots with his chin in the air like that against Dillian Whyte. However, Franklin did seem to adjust, and he stopped making the mistake as much as when the fight progressed. But he doesn't need to be making them kind of mistakes against Dillian Whyte, because Whyte should be, at least on paper, the biggest puncher that Jermaine Franklin has fought to date. And overall, let me know what you think about this card. I reckon it's pretty good. Or 3 fights are pretty good. The other 5 fights are like, nah. So how do you assess that? If you've got 5 fights that are kind of whatever, but 3 fights that are intriguing, is that a good card? Maybe it is. Let me know, people. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, it's decentralized, and it's 100% censorship-free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.